Luke chapter 6, verses 37 to 45. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your tap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. He also told them this parable. Can the blind lead the blind? Will they not both fall into a pit? The student is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, "Brother, let me take the speck out of your eye," when you're yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to move the speck from your brother's eye. No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings out evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of.
We come once again to gather ourselves around the words of Jesus. And you know, one of my burdens as I've been leading this series on Luke's Gospel is that we call ourselves Christians, and so the words of Jesus are the most important things that we need to take literally. If we're going to take anything in the Bible literally as Christians, it has to be the words of Jesus. Because if we take everything else literally and minimize these words because they're challenging, we're not worthy of calling ourselves Christians. That's not the point. The point is we gather round the words of Jesus. Now, the earliest of Christians, of course, we don't have that much documented until we get to the age of empire, when there was a great corruption of Christianity. But in the earliest times, the Sermon on the Mount was almost the measure for Jesus' followers. It wasn't purity of doctrine. It was orthopraxy. It was, we are taking the commands of Jesus seriously. And so today, we move on from what we discussed last time I was here, last time I was in residence behind my throne here. But we looked at loving enemies, didn't we, last time? And we looked at this concept of kind of being a community of Jesus' people who transgress the boundaries that people and even religion have put around truth and put around others. It's very easy to make enemies in this world if your ideology leads you down that route. And Jesus is kind of saying, last time out, that we are to love our enemies. Imagine that. I mean, that's just ridiculous and radical, isn't it? But just imagine if the church historically had taken that policy, we might live in a different world indeed. So today, we got Jesus, and he talks about do not judge, do not condemn, forgive and you will be forgiven, give and it will be given back to you. A really good measure will be yours. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you. I think the first thing I want to emphasize today is I sometimes read that bit of Jesus' teaching, and it reminds me of this idea that you get back what you give. You get back what you give. Now, I have, I should call everybody a friend, being as what I preached 2 weeks ago. But there are some people that in my life that I encounter, and they're bitter and angry about everything. And when you peel back the narrative by which they base their life on, you know, it basically makes them see in a particular way. And they're getting back, sadly, they can't recognize it, often what they are giving themselves. Sometimes people who have the greatest stories of being victims are the greatest perpetrators of the things that they believe they are suffering at the hands of others. I remember, and I'm sure my mum won't mind me saying this, but when I occupied, it's funny, I'm not a woman, but I did do stuff with Women's Aglow, and I was always surprised that they all had enemies. They all had enemies, and they would say it was the devil, but really, most of the time, they educated each other in their charismatic theology that the church was not on their side. And they were super gifted, and the church just wasn't really recognizing them. And what happens when you've got that being spoken out and you start to believe it? You become all of that. You start to have enemies. You start to sort of get back things that you're giving out from yourself. So I think Jesus is trying to teach his followers, listen, you'll get back what you give. So if you judge, you will be judged. If you condemn, you will be condemned. So let's flip it the other way then. Don't judge, and you will not be judged. Don't condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. I've said many a times, and you'll be used to me barking on about this idea of anchoring our lives in a hopeful narrative. You know, not that things are only going to get worse crowd. They really do my head in, people like that. I understand that we live life, and I understand that life does things to us. But the gospel is a gospel of hope. There is something worth living for in the here and now. And I think when we live lives of hope, we get back something that we fail to receive when we have a narrative of despair. So we've got to keep Jesus' challenge firm in our mind. Don't judge, and you will not be judged. Don't condemn, you will not be condemned. You will get back what you give. So therefore, it's important that we have a narrative of hope, and we resist narratives of despair that would make us go back to judgment and condemnation and unforgiveness, back to the stuff that makes us create enemies all around us. We get back what we give. But then Jesus also talks about leading. Can the blind lead the blind? Will they not both fall into a pit? The student's not above the teacher, and everyone fully trained will be like their teacher. I think Jesus is advocating leading with sight, leading with reality, leading with openness, leading with a teachable spirit. We are to be known, if we are leading others, to be related to our teacher, Jesus. And we look at the way he teaches and the way he leads, and we reflect on that and we emulate him. But then we've got logs and specks, haven't we? Jesus says, he starts with all this do not judge, and then he comes up with this little idea. How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? And I was sat there while I was listening to Jeanette read, and it just occurred to me, if you try to take the speck out of somebody's eye with a huge plank in your own eye, you're going to cause more damage, aren't you? You're going to wound them with your plank. You're going to kill and damage and destroy people. You think you're rescuing someone by taking a speck out their eye, but if you've got a log in your own, you will create untold damage. It is much better to be a person of self-reflection than anything else. My niece was telling me the other day that somebody had come up to her in her church and asked her a question about a friendship that she's got. And I thought it was a very invasive and rude question. And I said to her, the next time you get asked a question like that, why don't you just say, how is your relationship with Jesus? How's your relationship with Jesus? I'll focus on that and you focus on that. Instead, people are wanting to take specks out of other people's eyes. I sometimes think for myself, what gives anybody a right to do that anyway? What gives me a right to assume that I know everything about what your choices are all about, so that I've got the privilege and the power to take your speck away? In fact, I wish I could do that, because I reckon I would make money. You know, if I could take my shirt off now and throw it over you all, and all your specks disappear, I could ask you for money and say, if you don't give it me, you'll get a log instead. But we're called to be self-reflective people. It is easy to have a theology that makes you obsessed with the specks in other people's eyes. It is possible. And it is possible to do some ludicrous harm because you believe you've got the right to correct other people. Now, I don't know if anybody's picked up on this. A case in America of a charismatic preacher who had a hit list, a prayer list. And he was educated in a college that has this mantra that you must pray at least 5 aggressive prayers a day. Right? An aggressive prayer puts you one step away from a self-righteous aggressive action, and then puts you another step in line with a justification for such actions. This man, a prominent man with his hit list, dressed up as a police officer and murdered 4 people in the name of his God in America. 4 people who probably have woke ideology, who he would have considered an enemy. Excuse me, sir, Jesus didn't teach any of that stuff. Your seminary didn't taught you wrong. We have to be self-reflective. We have to be of the nature of Jesus, who teaches the greatest among you is the least. The one who is the least is the greatest. The one who gets on his knees and washes feet with a towel is the one who is the teacher, is the one who carries subversive power. We have to be reflective people in our way. It's interesting, there's a bit of a mantra which I really like with things like Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, which is you never directly tell somebody not to do something. You tell your story of how you came to understand that something wasn't good for you. Self-reflective storytelling. And what happens then, as the person tells the story, the other person reflects and thinks a bit more about themselves. I think the church often has a name for trying to remove specks from people rather than sharing stories of mercy and grace and reflection. So let's not be the kind of people that have a theology that permits us to judge others and think that we are better. We are purer. We are, in some ways have an authority and a right to intrude into other people's lives. What's that thing that I put out on Instagram? It's something like, don't let somebody who hasn't walked in your shoes tell you how to tie your shoelaces. And lastly, we've got trees and fruit, haven't we? This kind of logic that, if you see an apple tree, you expect apples from an apple tree. And if you don't get apples from an apple tree, and you get something else, it's probably not an apple tree, is it? And it's a great analogy. Trees and fruit. You are what you produce. It's simple, isn't it? You are what you produce. I think Jesus is very much about your actions matter. He's very much about that kind of stuff, because your actions tell me and tell others what you really believe. Now, I know there's certain theological strands in the church that are obsessed with doctrinal purity. And they tend to be the people who are emboldened to speak out first when they think something's wrong or to correct. But I often have a problem when I meet people like that, because I never see the product of their life being anything like Jesus, to me at least. I'm in the middle at the moment of a kind of friendship group where there's been a little bit of conflict. And the one thing one of my friends in this group has said to me is the conflict has arisen between two Christians, right? And there's no rhyme or reason why this conflict has arisen. And what my friend, who isn't a Christian, has said to me is isn't it wonderful that they believe in the doctrine of the incarnation? Isn't it good that they've got all the the I's dotted and T's? He said they're supposed to be Christians. What I see doesn't seem to equal Christianity. And I think sometimes I think we need to be delivered in the church, delivered of this such narrow-minded pettiness about theology. And because you can get it all right and be all wrong at the same time. You can get it all right and be all wrong. You can read Louis Berkhof's systematic theology and know what tulip means and hate somebody. You can read Wayne Grudem and agree with him that we shouldn't have women in leadership and stuff like that, and become misogynistic. We can know everything. We can be experts in religion and wholly wrong. Look at Jesus' main opponents. They thought they were standing for what was right and true and good, and Jesus was always getting at them. We are what we produce. And I've said time and time again, I hate it when I say to someone, I'm a Christian, and then I have to have a disclaimer on it. I say, well, I'm a Christian, but I'm not this kind, and that kind, and that kind, and this kind, and all of that. And I just wish that at the point where we said to somebody, I'm a Christian, their response would be, you're the people that love everybody. Imagine that. And then nobody has to apologise for all our little biases that we've justified because we've got, exclusive theology. Imagine that. You're the people that I want to come and see because you make me feel at home and warm and loved. Now, I am a bit naughty because I have got friends who are of the ilk of that I need to know and get everything right. I need to be biblical. And they're a bit like when I was a kid and the rent man visited my mum and dad's and we didn't have anything to pay and we hid behind the couch. That's how I treat people like that. I want to hide from them because there's no warmth there. It's narrow and I wish that people, when they engage with Christians, provide a good report when we leave them. Instead of saying, oh, don't invite them around again. Oh, my goodness. We couldn't even watch a film because it had some kind of witchcraft in it or whatever, Everything in your life gets tainted when these blind teachers come along and they want to try and take the speck out of your eye. For goodness sake. If there is any mark of pure biblical Christianity, as far as Paul and Jesus is concerned, it's love God and love your neighbour as yourself. It's that frightening concept called love that is exalted. God is love. There's no fear in love. Because those that fear are still living in death rather than life. So listen, folks. I know we've journeyed together. We're a community together. I don't stand up here and talk to you as if I'm not one of you. We're a community together. Let's commit today to be a community that doesn't judge, that doesn't condemn, that forgives, that breaks all these cycles of hatred. Let's practice the virtue or the ethic of love together. And let's understand that we get back what we give. And so, for that to work for us to have the power, we need to embrace the hope of the gospel of Jesus Christ. For God so loved the world that he gave. Let us lead others with sight, not with blindness. Let us be careful that we don't forget the art of self-reflection and we begin to try to dictate how people should live their lives and forget that there might be an awful lot in our back catalogue that needs dealing with too. Let's not damage one another because we feel that we know better than somebody else. It's difficult stuff. Let's be self-reflective practitioners of Christianity. When I went through conversion therapy and reflecting on my experience with conversion therapy, I realised now that I was being ministered to and damaged by the logs in the eyes of the people who were ministering to me. I was. And I've clearly got things about myself as well that I need to reflect on. But we will do untold damage if we think we have a warrant to somehow be the experts in sorting other people's lives out. We are better when we give honest stories of our journeys. It works so much better than anything else. I had a time when I really struggled to forgive somebody. And I remember I went round for lunch with Sharam, who comes to this church. And I don't know about you, but when I've got something on my mind or whatever, I can sometimes feel really kind of like, in my body feels pained and twisted and all of that. I'm struggling to forgive somebody. And Sharam told me a story from his life. He had no idea what was going on for me, but his story was about how he chose to love someone that was being an enemy to him in his workplace. And Sharon was a Christian, and in Iran, you really have to be a Muslim, and if you're not, it's very, very difficult. And there was this horrible atmosphere between him and his boss. And he said, I decided that I would pray for him, and I would love him, and I would bless him. And then suddenly, he began to see differently. And Sharon telling me that story, I just thought, I need to sort this situation out. He didn't say to me, now you need to sort yourself out because you're being bad. Nothing like that. He told the story. It gave me a key, and it opened a dimension for me to get something right and done in my life. Let's be those kinds of people. And let's remember, folks, we do have a fondness, don't we? I've gone and done formation training. The vast majority of ministerial training is a bit of an obsession with biblical stuff. But the world looks at what we produce far more readily than anything else. And I think Jesus says the ultimate test, the ultimate what you're going to get back is you'll be judged on what you produce. That's what you're going to get judged on, what you produce. And you might think I'm not being very reformed now, but we have to take Jesus at his word, don't we? So, let's commit ourselves to be an affirming presence for our community, to be the risen people of God for this town of Haywood. And let us, in doing that, see and enjoy God's kingdom coming to others through us, and then sometimes back to us too. Amen.